Welcome to Warhammer 40k lore in the Bible, where I pull from Warhammer 40k lore to help explain biblical lore. And today we're going over a hodgepodge of different Warhammer 40k lore TikToks. And then Monday is my main lore series. Every Wednesday will be the short version of that, and that's more of a narrative experience, while Monday's video is more of a lore study and a Bible study. And then I got these every Friday or Saturday. And these are where I use Warhammer 40k lore TikToks to kind of help explain the Bible. So it's in the same vein of things. I just wanted to give you guys some variety. But anyways, let's start out with Job 26:5. Dead things are formed from under the waters, and the inhabitants thereof. So this is kind of like Necrons in their tomb worlds, right? And then we got the word for dead, which is Rapha, and it means shades or ghosts. Now, these aren't humans, okay? These are what we call the Nephilim. Genesis 6, the angels came down, did their things with human women, and then created the giants. And then, since they weren't permitted, they weren't born in heaven or anything, they were permitted on earth. So they kind of became undying spirits, right? Or the demons. Okay. So, can you put one of these demons into a metal body, like a Necron? But anyways, let's get this started.
Here's what it looks like when one of the Necron's most destructive weapons is unleashed.
This is Paul the Geek, by the way. How powerful is a Necron Tachyon arrow?
During a battle against the Tyranids, Anrakir the Traveler's army began to lose ground and was forced to retreat. But Anrakir still had one weapon left. Flashes of light raced across his metal body, his systems shut down for a moment, and electrical arcs danced around him. A massive surge of energy was redirected into the device built into his wrist. The Necrons nearby immediately understood what was about to happen and howled in terror. Anrakir fired his Tachyon arrow, a tiny fragment of his own necrodermis. The air shook with a thunderous crack as the projectile shot toward the enemy at nearly the speed of light. Space around it twisted and the laws of physics bent before Necron technology. The tiny piece of Anrakir's body tore through the Tyranids and buried itself deep in the ground, destroying everything in its path. The monsters were blown apart, covering the battlefield in blood.
Yay.
Any creature caught in front of the projectile vanished in a fraction of a second. The ground roared and split under the force of the impact, followed by a devastating explosion. A molten crater remained where it struck, its surface turned to glass. Radiation began to spread from it while the surviving Tyranids nearby weakened and died like grass beneath a burning sun.
Alright, so I want to bring this verse up real quick, so check this out. This is Daniel 2:43. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. This is some kind of cybernetics thing, right? But anyways, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. Who's the they? But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Very interesting. Is this some kind of cybernetics or robotic stuff? Very interesting. Let's move on to the next TikTok. Now we're going to be watching Dr. Hammer, or Hamer, however you want to say that, Ogren, Warhammer 40k. So it's going to be about the Ogrens. Figured we might as well bring it up since we're talking about the giants anyway. Alright, so Genesis 6. In verse 4, I should say. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. These are your superheroes, your demigods and stuff like that. So they were supernaturally charged. They weren't just giant, they were supernaturally charged as well, right? So, very interesting. Now, the Ogrens weren't necessarily supernaturally charged, whatever, but they are very strong. Okay.
Let's talk about the biggest, dumbest soldiers mankind has ever seen. Ogrens are huge, hulking slabs of muscle, bone, and not much else, standing at around 10 feet tall on average, and strong enough to rip a space marine limb from limb. They compensate for this by being as dumb as a box of rocks. Easily confused, they struggle to follow more than the most simple and straightforward of missions. However, they are completely loyal to the Emperor, and make exceptional shock troops. Ogrens originally inhabited cold, barren, high-gravity prison worlds before being cut off during the Age of Strife. The high-gravity environment was what led to the thick skin, muscular build, and monstrous size, while the barren environments, cold climates, little food, and long periods of starvation forced their intellect to become more focused on matters of survival rather than philosophy. When rediscovered during the Great Crusade, Ogryns were immediately inducted into the Imperial Army as close combat soldiers. Most Ogryns are quite capable of bringing down almost any enemy even without training, and their natural combat skills make them good assault troops. Once indoctrinated into the Imperial cult, they are extremely loyal. They are known to do anything and everything their superiors ask of them, believing the orders they receive as having been passed down the chain of command by the Emperor himself.
Alright. So, I need to figure out how to stop the autoplay. But anyways, you'll see David goes up against Goliath, right? So he was a giant and all of that. But so in David after that goes up against the sons of Anak, which are the giants and stuff like that. Then you got the Raphaim, right, which are undead giants. So very interesting stuff. Let's move on to the next TikTok. Now we're going to be watching Fanatic Alvarez. Imagine you're in an Eldari heaven, and all of a sudden you see a zoanthrope trying to eat your soul. Okay, so this is basically about the Tyranids, and I'm going to bring up entities like the Tyranids in the Bible. So first, Revelation 9:7. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces as the faces of men, and their hair as the hair of women. And we know, right, there was genetic experiments going on in Genesis 6, right? So it wasn't just the giants. They were creating all different kinds of stuff. Jasher 4 says that men started mixing animal species or one animal species with the other. When God said a horse will mate with a horse, right? Not an eagle with a lion, like you do with griffins and all that, right? So that stuff was going on. So these aren't helicopters like most Christians say and whatnot. No, these are actual demonic armies here. But anyways, so Revelation talks about them, and then Joel 2 talks about them. And listen to this. So a fire devoureth before them, but behind a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them. This is verse 3. And a desolate wilderness behind them. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them as is the appearance of horses and horsemen. So shall they run. So let's talk about these locusts here. Like the noise of chariots on tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoured the stubble. As strong people set in battle array. So they're set in battle array, right? Armor and everything, right? Before their face, the people shall be much pained. All faces together gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men, and they shall climb the wall like men of war. And they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break ranks. Very interesting. And we know too, when Jesus is talking to the guy possessed with many demons, right? He says, my name is Legion, for we are many, which is a hive mind mentality, right? Like the Tyranids. But anyways.
Tyranid ain't heaven. Yep, you heard that right. Not a planet, not an army, the afterlife of an entire Eldari craft world. Because if you didn't know, when an Eldari dies, their soul gets preserved in something called the Infinity Circuit. It is the closest thing that the Eldari have to heaven, especially because it protects these souls from, Slaanesh. And if I were you and me, I would want to be protected from Slaanesh as well. Weirdo kink enjoyers. So how did the Tyranids get involved? Well, a dying Tyranid bioship. That's how. It launched a final wave onto the craft world of Malantai. Don't worry, the Eldari did try and kill every single creature that they knew was horrible. I want you to have to imagine fighting a Tyranid. Not one of my top 10 moments, that would be for sure. And while they were killing every creature that they believed was dangerous, they left one that was extremely powerful. Yeah, they ignored one single zoanthrope. We can't be ignoring zoanthropes, guys. Because that single mistake
I did in Space Marine 2, and my team hated me after that, so yeah.
Anyways. Of theirs, well, it erased them. Yeah, the zoanthrope found the Infinity Circuit and started devouring every single Eldari soul. And if that wasn't enough, every single soul that it devoured made him stronger. Until one single Tyranid was impossible to kill. It didn't even need a hive fleet. It drained all of Malantai until the entire craft world became a lifeless shell. So thanks to the zoanthrope, the Eldari named it the Doom of Malantai. And after consuming the one thing that an entire civilization had closest to heaven, it vanished. You would think that a Tyranid is actually terrifying because it will dismember you and kill you in probably one of the worst ways possible. But no! They consume your soul in the afterlife. Now that's terrifying.
Yummy.
So go ahead and name a Tyranid that is more scary than this one. I'll wait. Tyranid 8 Heaven.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm still trying to figure out. I stopped the auto scroll, but anyways, I guess that didn't work too well. So we saw that. Let's go here in Revelation. So they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings as the sound of chariots of many horses running in battle. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. I don't believe helicopters have stings in their tails. They have propellers and whatnot, but yeah, anyways. Okay, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. So, very interesting. But let's move on to the next TikTok. We are now watching a TikTok by the Imperial Saint, one of the most beautiful women in this set. Anyways, there was an actual purpose for Lorgar until it was ripped away from him. Alright. So, I liken Lorgar and Erebus, I guess, if you want to say, to what is called the false prophet, right? And check this out. This Zechariah 11:17 is talking about the false prophet, the one who left the flock and whatnot, right? Because we see that he has a face like a lamb, but horns, but spake as a dragon, right? So he's got that Jesus veneer to it, or Christian veneer to it, I should say, but not. But anyways, Zechariah 11:17. Woe to the idle shepherd that leaveth the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. This is that corruption that I've been talking about, what's called the shadow of death. It's always connected to this land of darkness, this dark dimension, right? The underworld, if you want to call it that. We see Jonas. He says, you saved me from the corruption, from the underworld. Because remember, he went into the bars of the earth, which is the portals to the underworld, basically. Babylonian, they call it the bars as well, of the gates of hell, basically, is what it is. And this corruption that comes from that, and you'll see, that's what's happening to the false prophet here. Just like, how the warp does, right? Or chaos, I should say, which is the warp. But anyways, I digress. Let's go ahead and watch this.
Lorgar was built to unify humanity through belief. He was not a conqueror first. He was a teacher, a philosopher, and a preacher. His instinct was to give meaning to the Imperium, not just territory. That worked at first. His worlds were loyal, stable, and unified. They believed in something larger than themselves. That belief was the problem. The Emperor demanded compliance, not worship. He wanted unity without faith. So when Lorgar treated the Emperor as a god, he was not corrected privately. He was publicly humiliated. He was told faith was forbidden, but he was never shown how to exist without it. That need to believe was still there. So when chaos answered him, it did not feel like corruption. It felt like the truth. It gave him gods that responded, spoke back, and
Satan does that, man. He gives you like 90, as they say, 90% truth, but 10% lie, right? But anyways.
And rewarded devotion. Lorgar did not turn because he was weak. He turned because the Imperium punished him for being exactly what he was created to be, and then left him with nowhere else to go.
All right. So, very interesting. If you see some guy with the right eye darkened, which I hardly doubt, because they're able to shapeshift, right? You see Satan, he says he can transform himself into an angel of light. And so his ministers turn into ministers of righteousness, right? And that's why we have to be careful on who we listen to, right? you can call yourself Christian all you want, is are you bringing the truth of what the Bible says, right? That's what you have to pay attention to, not the person, but the message. What message are they bringing? But anyways, so let's move on to the next. Now we're going to be reacting to Holy Terra, space travel in the year 40,000 explained. All right. So let's get into what are called the chariots of fire that are in the Bible. So 2 Kings 2:11. And it came to pass, as they still went on and talked, that behold, there appeared a chariot of fire, and horses of fire, and parted them both asunder. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind into heaven. This whirlwind, I believe, is a portal. And is this how this ship was able to come into our reality and whatnot? Or these chariots of fire, whatever you want to call them. Is this how they travel, too? Because you see this a lot in the Bible. This whirlwind comes, right? But very, very interesting. Because we know in Warhammer 40k, they got to use the warp and stuff like that to travel. But I digress.
You might be wondering, what is space travel like in the year 40,000? A warp jump is a method of faster-than-light travel used across the galaxy. This process involves a ship entering the warp, a parallel dimension, and re-emerging in real space light years away from its starting position. A warp jump begins when a ship activates its warp drive to create a tear between realities. The ship then moves within the warp currents and then re-enters real space. Ships must first travel to a Mandeville point, the closest safe distance from celestial bodies, to avoid interference with their navigational calculations caused by gravitational forces. Entering or exiting warp near planets risks catastrophic effects on the surrounding area. Navigation in the warp is highly unpredictable due to its ever-shifting currents and inconsistencies with real space physics. Small jumps of 4 to 5 light years are typically reliable, while longer jumps risk inaccuracy. Established channels offer safer passages, but unpredictable time distortion between warp and real space complicates journey planning. For example, on average, a day in the warp usually equates to 12 days in real space, but extreme time dilations can occur, sometimes delaying ships by centuries, or even allowing them to emerge before they entered. Warp jumps can be either calculated or piloted. Calculated jumps use pre-planned routes, but these are riskier since the ship cannot detect warp currents mid-flight. Piloted jumps, which allow for longer distances up to 5,000 light-years, rely on navigators, specialized humans able to navigate the warp by sensing the Astronomicon, a psychic beacon from Terra. Warp travel poses many dangers. Ships exiting the warp must appear in deep space to avoid gravitational destruction. The warp itself is populated with malevolent beings and chaotic entities. Ships are protected by warp-repelling barriers like the Geller field, though they're not always effective. Warp travel can also affect crew members, inducing hallucinations, malfunctioning servitors, and even corrupted data.
And what's interesting too, the Bible, I'll bring this up real quick. So this is almost like the warp here, in a way, or at least the realm of chaos, if you want to call it that. So Job 10:22. A land, or here, you know what? Let's go here. Oops. Sorry. Here we go. Okay. So verse 21, Job 10:21 and 22. Before I go whence, I shall not return, even to the land of darkness and the shadow of death. A land of darkness is darkness itself, and of the shadow of death, without any order, and where the light is as darkness. Very interesting. But anyways.
The Imperium's Quaestio Logisticus continually works to refine and predict safe warp routes, though outcomes vary dramatically. Stable warp routes and warp rifts, which offer alternative entry points, provide additional means for travel, but all warp interactions remain unpredictable and inherently dangerous.
Alright, I'm going to wind it down now. I want to thank everybody who liked the video. If you disliked the video, thank you for at least giving me a chance. You guys have a wonderful day or night.